Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an Airbus A330 pilot, and welcome to our after landing and single engine taxi in tutorial for the iniBuilds Airbus A330 in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. We've just vacated our runway, and once the runway is vacated, the pilot flying is going to initiate the after landing procedure by disarming the ground spoilers. When that is done, the pilot monitoring is going to set the weather radar to off, the predictive wind shear system off, then moves over to the other side and starts retracting the flaps. If the outside air temperature is 30 degrees or more, the flaps are only retracted into the one position. If the outside temperature is 29 degrees or less, the flaps are retracted completely. If ice might have built up on the flaps during the approach, keep them extended until the ground crew can verify that the entire flaps are indeed clear of ice so that no damage can appear while retracting them. The TCAS is turned into the standby position, and then we're moving up to the overhead panel, and over here, once the runway is vacated, the strobe light is returned to auto, the landing light switched off, and the nose light into the taxi position. Once the runway is vacated, you should start the APU immediately, so turning on the APU master switch and then turning on the APU start switch. The reason we start the APU immediately is because single engine taxi is considered standard procedure in the Airbus A330. Now let's go ahead and have a look at a practical example. First of all, we need to consider the minimum cooling time that applies to our engines. For the aircraft with Rolls-Royce engines, the minimum cooling time is 1 minute after the engine is returned to a thrust setting normally used for taxi. Note that idle reverse does count into this equation. For the General Electric engine, your cooling time is 3 minutes after the engine has been returned to idle thrust. Now, normally this means that once the runway is vacated and once the after landing procedure is complete and the APU becomes available, you can already go ahead and shut down engine number 2. Note that we always shut down engine number 2 for single engine taxi because engine number 1 feeds the blue hydraulic system, which is connected to the alternate brakes, giving us an alternative means to stop the aircraft should something happen to our main braking system. Now, once the APU becomes available and APU avail shows on the ECAM, we are going to shut down engine number 2. Note that contrary to the Airbus A320 family, the A330 does not require to turn on any electric hydraulic pump, since you still have 2 hydraulic systems available, fed by a single engine. When conducting single engine taxi, we've got to manage our aircraft energy carefully. You don't want to stop the aircraft while you are turning. The A330 has an increased drag during turns anyway, and you really want to avoid getting into a situation where you need excessive thrust, that means more than 40% N1, in order to turn your aircraft onto a gate. In my opinion, and this is not inside the Airbus manuals, in my opinion it is good practice to keep the ground speed above 5 knots when entering a turn, and to have your engines or your remaining engine increase the thrust slightly before turning. Now, as we're entering the gate, turn the nose light and the runway turn off light off, and once again verify that the weather radar is off, even though this was already checked in the after landing checklist. Be sure to use the oversteering technique as you steer onto your gate so that the aircraft cannot accidentally collide with anything to the left or to the right of your gate. Be sure that you align the aircraft carefully with the center line and eventually pick the right spot on the ground to stop the aircraft, taking into account the cutoff distance of around 18 meters you have in front of the plane. So, we are going to stop our aircraft exactly over here, and once at the gate we are going to set the park and brake. Now let's go ahead and carry out the shutdown procedure. When the park and brake is set, we are going to turn on the APU bleed, and you want to minimize the time with the APU bleed on, as the APU bleed turned on while the engines are still running, even if on just a single engine, is going to ingest fumes into the cabin, and you will immediately start smelling the, for many people lovely, for even more people not so lovely, smell of jet fuel. Now, once the APU bleed is on and the parking brake is set, we can shut down our remaining engine. Verify that the engine is running down normally, and only once the engine has run down normally, once N1 goes below 5% and N3, respectively N2 on the GE engine, goes below 20%, we can turn off the beacon and the wing light if applicable. Check that the cabin crew is disarming the slides. And once the slides are disarmed, unfortunately the iniBuilds at the moment doesn't do this in the correct sequence, but once the slides are disarmed, we are going to turn the seatbelt signs to off. Next up, we are going to turn off the fuel pumps, and once again we need to follow a certain sequence for this. The correct sequence of turning off the fuel pumps is standby pump first, and then the main pumps next. Again, standby pump first, main pumps next. Do note that if you are flying the 200 version that is fitted with a center tank, there is no standby pump for the center tank. You can turn off the two main center tank pumps straight away. Once that is completed, we can run the parking checklist, and with that we have completed our flight. Now, our post-flight duties aren't completely over though. As soon as the parking checklist is completed, we are going to switch the transponder to standby. We switch over to the fuel page, and over here we cross-check our fuel used and the amount of fuel that we have available in each of the tanks, and we note any difference that might occur between the different tanks. Now, if the fuel temperature in the outside tanks is negative and the temperature at your destination airport is so that icing might occur, note that a negative fuel temperature in the outside tanks has the possibility to freeze moisture that is in the air anyway, even at much higher temperatures. You should consider to use the outer tank transfer switch in order to transfer any fuel from the outer tanks to the inner tanks. Lift the guard, turn it on, and now you can see that the fuel from the outer tanks is flowing into the inner tanks and mixing with the normally warmer fuel that you will find in here. Last but not least, we are going back into the FMS, pressing data and position monitor, and verify the drift of the 3 different IRSs. There are tables in the FCOM. In general, you want less than 20 miles drift after around about a 10-hour flight. Well, once the outer tanks are empty, we can turn the outer tank transfer switch back off again. If the brakes are getting hot during your taxi-in, which can be monitored on the wheel page down here, the brake fan may be used. However, be careful that you do not turn the brake fan on while you're standing at the gate unless required due to brake temperatures. Now, the reason we don't want to turn the brake fan on at this time is because the brake fans are going to blow all the carbon dust that has formed on the brakes onto the parking stand, and carbon dust can cause cancer, so we want to protect our ground crew by not turning the brake fan on. Only if the actual brake temperature increases above 500 degrees, then you want to turn the brake fan on nonetheless, in order to avoid the fuse plugs in the tires melting. Now, in general, the brake fans are typically not required with the normal turnaround length of an Airbus A330, which is usually at least 90 minutes. Once the chocks and external power become available, unfortunately we can't trigger the chocks just now, the parking brake should be released in order to help with the brake cooling time. Now, when the ground power is available, we can turn it on, and once all our passengers have left the aircraft, we can go ahead and shut down the APU. Now, Once the APU has shut down, we can conduct our securing aircraft procedure, for which we are going to turn off all 3 IRSs, turn off the oxygen crew supply, turn off our lights, the signs, and once the APU has actually shut down, we can turn off the batteries as well, and then run the securing the aircraft checklist. Well, and this concludes our tutorial for the iniBuilds Airbus A330. There will be many more tutorials to come in this series, however by now you should be able to conduct a normal line flight from A to B outside of the long-haul environment. A dedicated tutorial for long-haul environments is going to follow, but for the time being I would like to thank you very much for watching. Hope that you have learned something on these tutorials. Leave your feedback in the comments below, and if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you all again on the next one.